If you had 1 minute to live, what would you do? That question has haunted me for years, but it never seemed real until the moment I found myself staring death in the face. In the chaos of life, it's easy to ignore the inevitable, to pretend that time is endless. But when the clock is ticking down, and there's nothing you can do to stop it, everything changes. I didn't believe in life after death. I never did. I was always the rational type, the person who scoffed at stories of near-death experiences, the kind who thought that once your heart stops beating, that's it. Lights out. End of story. But that was before I came face to face with the void. The moment I realized I was about to die, there was no fanfare. No dramatic farewell or final reflection on my life. Instead, it was a deep, unsettling stillness. It's as if the world around me slowed down and became muffled. I couldn't hear the familiar sounds of the hospital. No beeping machines, no nurses' footsteps, no conversations murmured in the background. Everything went quiet. The feeling that came next was indescribable. I was lying on the operating table, my body numb from the anesthesia, but something felt different. I could sense the cold sterile air around me, but there was a strange emptiness, as though my very essence was starting to detach. And then I heard the doctor's voice, distant and calm, "We've lost him. No pulse." I should have been terrified, right? After all, I was dying. But in that moment, the terror never came. It was as if my mind couldn't fully grasp the finality of it. There was just this odd, eerie peace that wrapped itself around me. My chest was heavy, and yet, I didn't feel pain, just a sort of absence. It was a moment of profound silence. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what it feels like to be dead. But I was wrong. What happened next wasn't death. It was something else entirely. The world around me began to blur. At first, it was just a subtle shift, like the edges of my vision were fading. Then, it became clearer. The edges of my body, the very boundary between me and the hospital room, began to dissolve. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or if this was reality. But as I looked down at myself lying motionless on the table, it hit me, I was no longer in my body. I could see my own body, but I wasn't in it. I was floating above it, suspended in a strange, weightless state. There was no pain, no discomfort, just this detached feeling, like I was an observer of my own life. And that's when I felt it, something pulling me upward. Not physically. No strings or ropes. It was like a force, an invisible current, drawing me up, away from the table and the sterile lights of the operating room. I could still see my body below, but it was growing distant, like it belonged to someone else. As I drifted further from the table, I noticed something strange. There was no sense of space, no sense of time. It was as though I was floating through an infinite void, where everything and nothing existed at once. There were no walls, no boundaries. Just darkness and light, but not the way we know light. It was softer, gentler, almost like it was alive. And then I saw it. A light. Not like any light I'd ever seen before. It wasn't blinding or harsh. In fact, it wasn't the kind of light that would hurt your eyes. It was a gentle, warm glow, something you'd imagine being wrapped in the purest form of comfort. It wasn't a light at the end of a tunnel or some cliché from a near-death story. It was, beyond that. It felt like it was calling me, inviting me, welcoming me into something bigger than anything I could comprehend. As I moved closer to it, I felt a shift in the air around me, a kind of warmth, a deep, comforting warmth that spread through my being. It was like every cell in my body was sighing with relief. I was no longer weighed down by the fear and the worries that had consumed me in life. I felt lighter, freer, more at peace than I had ever felt. And in that moment, something profound happened. I began to hear something. It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense, not like someone speaking to me. It was more of a knowing, an understanding that passed through my entire consciousness. "Come closer," it seemed to say. I didn't have the words to describe it at the time, but it was as if the light was offering me a choice: you can stay here. You can be at peace, free from pain, free from all the struggles of life. Or you can go back. You can return to the world you left behind. I didn't know how long I was in that place, or if time even existed there. But I knew that whatever decision I made would change everything. I was standing at the threshold of something I didn't fully understand, but it felt like the most important decision I would ever make. My mind raced, even though I wasn't sure where my thoughts were coming from. Stay here, or go back? The question felt heavy. In a way, it felt like my entire life had led up to this point. I could feel the pull of the light, and I wanted to surrender to it. I wanted to let go of everything, to step into the warmth and peace that it promised. But then, as if the choice wasn't mine alone to make, I heard another voice. This one was softer, almost gentle, but it carried a weight of its own, an undeniable presence. You can't stay, it said. The voice wasn't harsh, but it was clear. It was not a suggestion, not an option. It was a statement of fact. Suddenly, I felt myself pulled back, not just in space, but in time. I could sense the familiar tug of my earthly existence, like a tether pulling me back to something I didn't want to go back to. I wasn't ready to leave the peace of the light, but something inside me understood. The time had not come for me to stay. With a jolt, I was back. Back in my body. Back on the operating table. And just like that, everything around me returned to reality. The hum of the machines. The sterile smell of the room. The sharp, sterile lights. But I wasn't the same. When I opened my eyes, I saw the faces of the doctors and nurses looking down at me. They were talking to me, asking me questions, but none of their words made sense. I felt like I was hearing them from a distance, as if I wasn't fully present in the room with them. I wanted to tell them what had just happened, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain to them what I'd seen, what I'd felt? How could I make them understand that I had touched something greater than life itself? No one could understand what I had just gone through. They didn't believe me when I tried to tell them. And that was the moment I realized, I wasn't the same person anymore. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The moment I returned to my body, it was as though everything around me rushed back all at once, too quickly, too violently. The lights above me were blinding, the sterile scent of the hospital room overwhelmed my senses. I felt cold again. Too cold. My body, which had once felt so foreign and detached, was now painfully real again. I wasn't sure if I should be scared or relieved. The transition back into my body felt like a violent pull, as if I had been yanked out of the very fabric of peace that had surrounded me in that place of light. My chest ached as I took my first breath, a jagged, shallow inhale that felt like an effort, as if I'd forgotten how to breathe properly. But as soon as the air hit my lungs, a strange wave of awareness flooded over me. Something had changed. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew that whatever happened in that other place, it had left a permanent mark on me. The doctors were talking, but I couldn't make sense of their words. My mind was still there, back with the light, back with the warmth. I wanted to speak, to explain to them what I had seen, but the words felt like they were stuck somewhere deep inside me, unwilling to break free. How could I describe what I had just experienced? How could I make them understand the profound, indescribable peace that I had felt? The thing that I had been searching for my whole life, but didn't know I was searching for. I glanced around the room, feeling disoriented. The faces of the doctors seemed distant, almost like they were standing on the edge of my reality, not quite connected to me. The sterile white walls, the harsh overhead lighting, they felt wrong, like I no longer belonged here. It was as if the world had shifted, and I was an outsider, standing just outside the lines of everything I used to know. The nurse began checking my vitals, and I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, the words stuck behind my lips. I managed a hoarse whisper. "Where am I?" What happened? She looked at me with a mixture of concern and confusion. You're in the recovery room. You've just come out of surgery. Everything went fine. You've been unconscious for about an hour. But I wasn't listening to her anymore. I was trying to process the vastness of what had just happened. That light. The warmth. The choice. I had left. I had gone somewhere. I wasn't sure what I had seen, but I knew without a shadow of a doubt that it was real. That it was more real than the cold, clinical reality I was now surrounded by. I could feel the tug of something deep within me, something that wanted to return to that light. To stay there, in the comfort of that peace, away from the confusion, the pain, and the uncertainty of life. It was so easy to want to slip back into that other place. It was easy to let go. But I was here. I was back. And I had no idea what to do with it. The nurse handed me a glass of water, and I took a sip, grateful for the simple comfort of it, even though I was still half in that strange place I had left behind. I felt as though I was floating between two worlds. I was aware of my body, aware of the ache in my muscles, the pounding in my head, the disorienting sense that I wasn't quite all here yet. But I also felt the otherness of that place, that deep, eternal peace, lingering just behind my thoughts like a shadow. The door opened, and my wife, Emily, stepped into the room, her face a mix of relief and worry. Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought she might see something in me that I couldn't explain. "Hey," she said softly, walking toward the bed. "You're awake. How do you feel?" I could hear her voice, but it felt muffled. It was as though I were hearing her through a thick fog. I looked at her, trying to smile, but the words caught in my throat again. I didn't know how to explain to her what had just happened, what I had just seen. "Are you okay?" she asked again, her voice more urgent now. "The surgery, was everything all right?" I nodded, but my mind was still 1,000 miles away. The words I needed to say, the truth, refused to come. What would she think if I told her? What would anyone think? They would think I was crazy. They wouldn't understand. I wanted to tell her about the light. About the warmth. About the peace that had wrapped itself around me like a cocoon. But how could I explain the unexplainable? How could I share an experience that was so otherworldly? I looked at her again, and her expression softened. She reached for my hand, and it was as if the warmth of her touch pulled me back to the present moment. Back to the reality I was struggling to reconnect with. "Tell me what happened," she said gently, her eyes full of concern. "You were gone for so long. The doctors were worried." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I tried again, my throat dry, my chest tight. I don't know." She squeezed my hand. "It's okay. Just take your time." I nodded. And I wanted to take my time. But in that moment, I wasn't sure I had the words to describe the overwhelming truth that had been revealed to me. The truth that I had died. The truth that I had left this world behind, if only for a moment. And the truth that I wasn't the same anymore. How could I tell her? How could I explain that everything I had ever believed in was now in question? That I had touched something beyond the realm of life and death. For the first time, I realized that the world I was now living in, the world I had returned to, no longer felt like home. I had crossed over to something else, something bigger, and now I was back, trying to make sense of a reality that felt increasingly small, increasingly foreign. And as I looked into her eyes, I realized that no one, could understand what I had just been through. Not unless they had been there. But I didn't know how to make them understand. How to explain the impossible. And so, I remained silent. For now, at least. But deep down, I knew that I would never be the same again. The world, now that I was back in it, felt strangely different. The sharp fluorescent lights of the hospital room, once so ordinary, now seemed like harsh intruders. Their bright, sterile glow felt more intrusive than illuminating, as though they were forcing me to confront a reality I didn't want to see. I looked at Emily, her face still concerned but tinged with a hopeful expression that I had woken up, come back, from the surgery. But I couldn't meet her gaze for long. Something about the weight of her eyes, so full of love and concern, felt suffocating. Instead, I focused on the sounds, the beeping of the heart monitor, the quiet rustling of nurses' footsteps outside the room. All the familiar noises seemed dull, as if they were muffled, coming from another world entirely. Every sound felt filtered through a veil, and I wondered if I was still hearing things clearly. Was this reality, or was I still in some half-dream, caught between the realm of life and death? I stared at my hands, which were wrapped in the thin hospital sheets, and I couldn't help but feel disconnected from them. They seemed to belong to someone else. I flexed my fingers, but the sensation of touch was faint, distant, as though I were experiencing it through a fog. My skin, which had once felt so familiar, was now foreign to me. I didn't feel entirely grounded, as if my body had somehow lost its solidity in the brief moments when I had been dead. My senses, once sharply attuned to the world around me, were now overwhelmed by the faintest of stimuli. I could hear Emily's voice, but it felt as if she were speaking from far away. I could feel the softness of the sheets, but it was as if my skin wasn't quite there. Everything was muted, diluted. My body felt heavy and strange, yet light at the same time, as if it weren't fully my own anymore. It was then that the overwhelming realization hit me: what I had experienced during those few minutes I had been dead wasn't just a fleeting dream. It was real. It was more real than anything I had ever known in life. When I had left my body, I hadn't just floated above it as an observer. I had felt it. I had felt myself slipping away from the weight of physical existence. And now, as I returned to my body, it felt as though I was being pulled back into something far more cumbersome, far more limiting. But there was more. More that I couldn't understand, but that was now flooding through me like an awakening of the senses. It wasn't just a strange feeling of detachment from my body, it was as if I could feel something else, something deeper, that I couldn't quite place. There was a presence, an energy, that I had encountered in the light, something that had whispered to me, that had known me, in a way that I couldn't even explain. I could almost feel it now, just on the periphery of my awareness, like a shadow following me. A deep, unexplainable connection. Something larger than myself. What happened? Emily asked again, her voice now tinged with a faint urgency. She was trying to get through to me, trying to pull me back to her. But how could I return to the woman I had been just hours ago? How could I be the same man who had walked into the hospital? I looked at her, and for a split second, it was as if I was seeing her for the first time. Not as my wife, my partner, the woman I loved, but as a human being, just one of many souls on this earth, part of something vast and unknowable. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to spill out the entire truth of what I had experienced, the warmth, the light, the feeling of being home, but I couldn't find the words. The experience was too deep, too sacred, to be conveyed through mere words. Instead, I spoke the only words I could manage. I saw it. I saw it, Emily. I was there. She gave me a puzzled look, a frown creasing her forehead. Where? What do you mean? I paused, looking down at my hands again, unsure if I could explain what I was feeling. The weight of her gaze was intense, and I could sense the confusion in her eyes. She was worried, and I understood that. She had no idea what I had just gone through, and there was no way I could make her understand, at least, not in the way I needed her to. I wanted to reach out to her, to explain. To make her see what I had seen, feel what I had felt. But I was aware of the gulf between us now. I had experienced something that she, no one, really, could understand unless they had crossed that threshold themselves. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how alone I felt. This was no longer about the physical recovery from surgery, it was about something much more profound. I had experienced death, and I had returned. And now, I wasn't sure how to live in a world that seemed so different, so foreign. My mind was spinning with questions, none of which had answers. What had happened to me? Why had I come back? What was I supposed to do with this new awareness? The light, the warmth, the peace I had felt were not something I could easily forget. They were imprinted on my soul, etched into the very fabric of who I was now. And there was a message there, a message that I had to figure out, to understand. I hadn't just been shown something beautiful, something transcendent, I had been shown something that meant something. It had to. But how could I decipher it? I felt Emily's hand gently squeezing mine, pulling me back into the present moment. I looked at her, trying to find the words, but all that came out was a whisper. I don't know what it was, but I felt it. It was real, Emily. It was real. Her expression softened, though I could tell she was still struggling to grasp what I was saying. She probably thought I was still groggy from the anesthesia, that I was still disoriented from the surgery. Maybe that was part of it, maybe I was disoriented. But deep down, I knew what I had seen wasn't just the result of drugs or post-surgical confusion. It was real. And the reality of it was slowly, painfully settling in. I had been to the other side. I had crossed into the realm beyond life, and I had come back. But I couldn't just return to life as it was before. The life I had left behind, this life, this world, this body, it all felt so distant, so disconnected from what I had just experienced. It was as if I had been shown a glimpse of something more, something bigger, and now I was forced to live in a reality that suddenly felt insufficient. I wanted to share it, to tell Emily, to scream it to the world. But who would believe me? Who could understand? And so, I remained silent. For now. But I knew, deep within my soul, that everything had changed. And I couldn't shake the feeling that what I had seen was just the beginning. The days that followed my surgery felt like I was living in a dream, caught between two realities, one foot still in the world I had just left, and the other in this new, unfamiliar existence. The physical recovery process seemed slow, almost irrelevant in comparison to the turmoil inside me. My body had healed quickly enough, but my soul, my mind, had been altered in ways that I couldn't put into words. No matter how many times I tried to explain to Emily, she couldn't fully grasp the depth of what I had experienced. We spent the first few days in the hospital, with Emily visiting me, trying to get me to eat, trying to get me to talk. But every time I opened my mouth to explain, the words seemed inadequate. I could see the concern in her eyes, her attempts to comfort me, but they were all based on a reality that no longer made sense to me. Her world, the one we shared, was no longer mine. As the nurses checked my vitals and the doctors came in for their rounds, I tried to be present, to at least act like I was the man they thought I was, the man I had been before the surgery. But inside, I was a stranger to myself. My thoughts kept drifting back to that place, the light, the warmth, the overwhelming sense of peace. I couldn't let it go. It was a part of me now, like a seed planted deep within my soul, and no matter how much I tried to focus on the mundane details of daily life, that seed kept growing, unfurling, demanding attention. Emily tried to comfort me, but I could feel the distance between us growing. She couldn't understand. She couldn't see what I had seen. How could I explain the profound change I had gone through when I didn't even understand it myself? One evening, after dinner in the hospital room, I finally turned to her, feeling the weight of silence pressing in on me. Emily, I began, my voice hoarse. I don't know how to tell you this, but everything feels different now. I'm different. She looked at me with a concerned expression, her eyes searching mine for some sign that I was okay. What do you mean? She asked softly. I mean, it's like I've come back, but I'm not the same person. I don't feel like me anymore, I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. I felt something. I saw something. And now, I don't know how to be here. In this world. Her eyes widened, and I could see her trying to process my words. She reached out and took my hand, her grip tight with concern. "You're just recovering from surgery, honey. You're still in shock. That's all." I shook my head slowly. "It's not that, Emily. I felt it. I was there. I was on the other side. And I came back, but I don't know why. And I don't know how to go on pretending like everything is normal when everything inside me feels so wrong." She paused for a moment, clearly trying to digest what I was saying. Finally, she spoke softly, "I don't know what you saw or felt, but I'm here for you. Whatever it is, we'll get through this together. You don't have to face it alone." Her words should have been comforting, but instead, they made me feel even more isolated. She was trying so hard, but the truth was, she didn't understand. How could she? How could anyone? I forced a small smile, trying to reassure her. I know you're here for me. But I need to figure this out. I need to understand it." The next few days were a blur. The hospital room became a place of confusion for me. I spent hours lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind swirling with thoughts and questions I couldn't answer. The light, the peace, the overwhelming sense of love, I couldn't shake it. It followed me, even in my waking hours. It was like a whisper at the edge of my mind, reminding me that I had touched something far beyond this life, and it had touched me in return. But every time I tried to explain it, I was met with confusion, doubt, or worse, pity. Emily tried to comfort me, but I could tell she was growing frustrated. She wanted me to be the man I was before, the man who went to work every day, who laughed at stupid jokes, who could hold a conversation about the mundane details of life. But I couldn't be that man anymore. I couldn't pretend. I began to pull away. It wasn't intentional, but I couldn't help it. The distance between us grew. Every time she asked me about the hospital, about my recovery, I found myself shutting down. I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't talk about the light, the warmth, the peace. I couldn't explain why I felt like a stranger in my own body. I couldn't explain why I no longer feared death. But the fear of death had been replaced by something else, a deep, unsettling sense of knowing. I had seen the other side, and I had returned. And that made everything in this world seem insignificant. I didn't fear death anymore, but I also didn't understand why I had come back. Why had I been chosen to return? Was I supposed to do something with this knowledge, or was it just a glimpse into something that would remain forever beyond my reach? One afternoon, after Emily had left for a few hours to run errands, I sat in the hospital room, staring at the walls. I couldn't focus on the television or the magazines by my bedside. I couldn't even focus on the food they had brought me. I was lost in my own thoughts, desperately searching for something that could explain it all. That was when I heard it again. The whisper. "You have a choice." It was as if the voice, the presence I had felt in the light, was speaking directly to me. It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense, but a feeling, a knowing that pierced through the fog of my confusion. I closed my eyes, trying to clear my mind, but it was there again, stronger this time. "You have a choice. You can stay, or you can go back." The words weren't clear like a spoken sentence, but they carried a weight of meaning that was unmistakable. I sat up straight in bed, my heart racing. I felt like I was on the edge of something again, something vast and incomprehensible. But this time, the choice wasn't to stay in the light. It was a choice to understand it, to embrace it or to leave it behind. I didn't know if the choice was real, if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But I felt it deep inside, like an undeniable pull. I had been given a glimpse of something greater than life, and now, I was being asked to choose, stay in this world of confusion and doubt, or embrace the peace and knowing that had been offered to me. I didn't know what I would choose. But I knew one thing for certain, the person I was before, I couldn't go back to him. That man was gone. And I didn't know what the future held, but I could no longer live in the dark about what I had seen. I had to find out what this all meant. The days continued to pass, but they no longer held the same significance they once did. Time seemed to blur together, the hours passing in an almost dreamlike haze. I had been released from the hospital, but it didn't feel like I had returned to normal. I was home with Emily, yet I was so far from what had been. My body had healed, but my mind was a fragmented puzzle, with pieces scattered across places I didn't fully understand. Emily tried to act like everything was normal. She'd fix meals, talk to me about mundane things, and try to fill the silence with small, familiar conversations. But I couldn't bring myself to engage in them. I couldn't pretend. Every time I looked at her, I felt the distance between us. Not because of any fault of hers, but because I had touched something she couldn't see, and I knew it. She couldn't understand what I had experienced, and the weight of that knowledge made me feel more isolated than I had ever felt before. I spent most of my days pacing the house, trying to make sense of the feelings I couldn't put into words. The light, the peace, the overwhelming sense of love, it was all so vivid in my mind. But what did it mean? What was I supposed to do with this feeling that tugged at my heart, that refused to let me rest? One afternoon, Emily went out with a friend to run errands, and I was left alone. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to sit down, really sit, without feeling like I was drowning in thoughts. I needed to find clarity. I needed to understand. I had been given something precious, something profound, and yet I felt lost. It was in the silence of the house that I finally let myself think, really think, about what I had seen. What had I experienced? What had happened during those 3 minutes when I was technically dead? What was the purpose of it all? The words I had heard, "You have a choice. You can stay, or you can go back." They echoed in my mind like a mantra, but what did they mean? At the time, I had thought the choice was about whether to stay in the light or return to the world of the living. But now, I wondered if it meant something deeper. Had I truly chosen to return? Or had there been something beyond the light that I hadn't fully grasped yet? It was then that I remembered something I hadn't fully processed at the time of my experience. In the light, in that space between life and death, I had felt a deep connection. Not just to the light itself, but to everything around me, everything I had ever known. It was as though I was connected to the universe, to all of humanity, to every soul that had ever lived. There was no division between us. It was as though we were all part of the same intricate, delicate web of existence. And in that moment, a thought struck me, was that the lesson? The lesson wasn't about the afterlife or about where we go when we die. The lesson was about connection. It was clear now. During my brief experience on the other side, I had felt the deepest sense of love, of unity, of knowing. I had felt that there was more to life than what I had known. More than work, more than the routine of day-to-day existence, more than the petty concerns that often consumed my thoughts. The world felt so small now, so insignificant in comparison to the vastness I had touched. That was the gift, I realized. The experience wasn't just about what lay beyond death, it was about how we live. It was about the choices we make here, in this world, in this life. The light had shown me that love, connection, and understanding were the keys to true peace. It wasn't about fear or regret. It was about embracing the interconnectedness of all beings, realizing that we are not alone. And yet, even with that clarity, I still felt lost. There was so much I needed to process. It wasn't just the feeling of peace that I had experienced, it was the overwhelming responsibility that came with it. How could I return to a life that seemed so shallow, so disconnected from what I had just learned? How could I go on living when I now knew there was so much more, when I had been shown the potential for something greater? I didn't know if I was ready to accept this responsibility. To live with the knowledge I had been given. It felt like too much. The weight of it was suffocating, and the more I thought about it, the more I wondered if I was even capable of living up to the lesson I had learned. The first step was acknowledging what I had seen, what I had felt. But now, the challenge was translating that into real life. Could I live in a way that honored the peace I had felt? Could I live with the love and connection that had been shown to me? That evening, as I sat in the quiet of the house, I thought back to the moments before the surgery. I had been so afraid of death, so consumed with the idea of my own mortality. But now, that fear had faded into something far deeper, far more meaningful. I had been shown something beyond death, beyond this life, and it had changed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. And yet, despite this newfound understanding, I still found myself struggling. The world around me hadn't changed, but I had. And the gap between who I had been and who I was now felt like a chasm I couldn't cross. I thought about Emily again. She had been so patient with me, so caring. And yet, I couldn't help but feel like I was pulling away from her. She didn't understand what I had gone through, and I didn't know how to make her understand. How could I? I had been to the other side, and it was something that could never truly be shared. Still, I knew I had to try. I couldn't carry this burden alone. Maybe the lesson wasn't just about love and connection with the universe, it was also about love and connection with those closest to me. The next morning, as I sat with Emily over breakfast, I decided I needed to tell her. I needed to explain, at least as best as I could, what I had experienced. I didn't know if it would help, or if it would only make things worse, but I had to try. Emily, I began, my voice shaky, I need to talk to you about something. She looked up from her coffee, her brow furrowing slightly. What's wrong, honey? Are you okay? I nodded, trying to steady myself. I don't think I've fully explained what happened to me. What I saw. What I felt. But I need you to try to understand, even if it's hard. She put her cup down and gave me her full attention, her eyes filled with concern and love. I took a deep breath, knowing that I was about to reveal something that might be impossible to comprehend, but something that I had to share. I don't know if I can make you understand, I said, my voice trembling. But I need you to know that I saw something real. And it changed me, Emily. It's not just about life or death, it's about how we live. It's about how we love, how we connect. I felt something in that light, something more powerful than anything I've ever known. And I don't know how to live with it. I don't know how to go back to the way things were. Her eyes softened, and she reached for my hand across the table. I'm here, she said quietly. I don't understand, but I'm here. And in that moment, for the first time since I had returned, I didn't feel so alone. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? I thought I had begun to understand, or at least, had made peace with what I had seen. But as I sat there with Emily, her hand holding mine, I realized that the journey wasn't over yet. The revelations I had experienced were only the beginning. There was more I needed to learn. More I needed to understand. And that gnawing feeling inside me, the one that had followed me since I woke up from surgery, refused to let me rest. After that moment, I began to question everything I had known about life, death, and what lay beyond. I tried to bury these questions, tried to push them aside and focus on the present, on Emily, on my recovery. But every time I tried to live a normal life, the truth that had been revealed to me in those brief 3 minutes kept resurfacing. It was as though something was calling me, urging me to seek deeper meaning in the world around me. To find purpose in the aftermath of this experience. But how could I? How could I make sense of something so vast when I was still struggling to comprehend the changes within myself? One evening, about a week after I had shared my experience with Emily, I found myself sitting alone on the back porch, staring up at the sky. The sun had just set, and the sky was a deep shade of purple, the stars beginning to appear, one by one. It was peaceful out here, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The air was cool, the world quiet except for the occasional chirp of crickets and rustle of leaves in the breeze. But that night, the peace didn't last. I had barely settled into my thoughts when I felt it, a familiar sensation, like the gentle pressure of someone standing beside me. My breath caught in my throat, and I looked around, half expecting to see someone there. But no one was. And yet, I knew. I knew that I wasn't alone. The sensation grew stronger, and I felt my heart begin to race. It wasn't fear, though. More like anticipation. Like I was on the verge of something. I closed my eyes, and I felt the warmth flood my body again, just like I had felt in the light, that place beyond life. I could hear it, too, soft whispers, so faint at first that I wasn't sure if they were real. But then they grew clearer, like a voice calling out to me from far away. You are not alone. The words weren't spoken out loud, but somehow, I heard them, deep inside my mind. My body shivered, not from cold, but from the sheer intensity of the presence I felt. This was different from before. This wasn't just the feeling of peace I had encountered. This was something more. A message. A presence. I stayed still, trying to breathe through the feeling. It wasn't frightening, but it was powerful, overwhelming, even. And then, the voice came again, more distinct now. You were chosen. You have a purpose. Your journey is not over. I opened my eyes, my heart hammering in my chest. My eyes darted around the porch again, looking for any sign of what had just happened. But there was no one there. The sensation, the presence, was gone as quickly as it had come. I sat there for a long time, my mind racing. What had just happened? Was I imagining things? I couldn't be sure. But deep down, I knew that what I had felt was real. It wasn't my mind playing tricks on me. It was something other. Something greater. I thought back to the choice I had been given in the light, the choice to stay or return. Had I chosen to come back because of this? Had I been sent back for a reason? And if so, what was that reason? What was my purpose? The questions kept swirling in my mind as I returned to the house later that night. I found Emily sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine, a faint smile on her face as she looked up at me. Everything okay? She asked, her voice warm and soft, as if she could sense the tension in my shoulders. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. Yeah. Just thinking. She tilted her head, concern flashing across her face. About what? I hesitated, unsure how to explain the experience. Just about everything, really. About what happened after the surgery. About why I came back. Emily's eyes softened. I know you've been struggling with it. But you're here now, and I know that's where you belong. Maybe this whole thing has a deeper meaning, something we can't understand yet. But we'll figure it out, together. Her words were comforting, but they didn't ease the urgency I felt. The message, you were chosen. You have a purpose, kept echoing in my mind. I had to find that purpose. I had to understand what it was. Over the next few days, I spent more time trying to connect with the experience I had had. I meditated, tried to quiet my mind, and reflect on the sensations, the messages, and the feelings I had encountered during my time on the other side. But no matter how hard I tried, the answers didn't come easily. One night, feeling frustrated and restless, I turned to a new approach. I'd always been a man of logic, of reason, and now, for the first time, I began to question if my scientific mind was holding me back. What if the answers I sought weren't found through reason, but through something deeper, something beyond my understanding? I decided to try something different. I sat down in front of my computer and began searching for near-death experiences, for people who had gone through what I had. I read story after story, some deeply spiritual, others more grounded in reality. Each one was unique, yet many of them shared a common theme, a feeling of connection, of love, and a deep sense of purpose. The more I read, the more I realized that I wasn't alone in what I had experienced. Then, late one night, I came across an article about a study on near-death experiences. The study had documented hundreds of accounts from people who had experienced the afterlife, and the results were striking. Many of the subjects reported similar sensations: the feeling of floating outside their bodies, the sense of warmth and peace, and the overwhelming presence of love and understanding. But most fascinating to me was the consistent theme that those who had experienced NDEs felt a renewed sense of purpose upon their return. The article mentioned that these individuals often found themselves drawn to help others, to live lives filled with greater compassion, and to seek meaning in ways they never had before. I sat back in my chair, my heart racing. Could this be my purpose? To help others? To live in a way that honored the lesson I had learned? Was I supposed to share my experience with others, to help them understand the connection between life and death? For the first time since I had returned from the other side, I felt a flicker of clarity. This was the beginning of my journey. This was what I was meant to do. I didn't know how it would unfold, or what path I would take, but I knew that my life had meaning. My experience had meaning. And just like that, the overwhelming fear I had once felt about death began to fade, replaced with a profound sense of peace. The journey was only beginning. The next few weeks were a blur of emotions: fear, hope, confusion, and ultimately, acceptance. I had finally begun to accept that the life I had known, the person I had been, could no longer exist in the same way. Something inside me had shifted, and I couldn't go back to the way things were, even if I tried. It was as though I had been given a glimpse of something vast, something profound, and now I couldn't unsee it. I had seen beyond the veil of death, and in doing so, I had awakened a part of myself that had been dormant for years. The life I had once taken for granted, with its routines and distractions, no longer felt meaningful. I began to realize that I had been living in a kind of stupor, consumed by superficial concerns, blind to the deeper truths that surrounded me. I couldn't live like that anymore. I needed to change, to grow, to live with intention. But where did I begin? How did someone like me, a man who had spent most of his life working in the corporate world, who had never really questioned his place in the world, make sense of this new existence? I started small. I began by reaching out to people. I didn't have all the answers, but I felt an overwhelming need to connect with others. To share my story. To let them know that life was more than what we could see with our eyes. That there was something beyond the here and now, something bigger than us all. Emily noticed the change in me almost immediately. At first, she thought it was just a phase, a temporary reaction to the trauma I had gone through. But as the days went on, she began to see the shift in me, too. It wasn't just that I was different, it was that I was alive in a way I had never been before. One evening, as we sat together in our living room, Emily asked, "How are you really feeling? I know you've been through so much, but it feels like something's different." In a good way, I think. I paused for a moment, not sure how to express what I was feeling. I don't know how to explain it, Em. It's like I've woken up. Like I've been given a second chance to live, but not just to exist. To really live. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face. I think I see it. It's like you're more present. More connected to things. To me. To life. I smiled softly, feeling the weight of her words. I think you're right. It's just I can't go back to the way I was. I can't go back to living like I did before. It doesn't make sense anymore. Then don't, she said, her voice steady and sure. Live differently. We can figure it out together. Her support meant the world to me. But even with Emily's encouragement, there was a part of me that felt hesitant. I had been changed by what I had experienced, but the world around me hadn't changed. People were still living their everyday lives, consumed by their routines, unaware of the deeper truths I had touched. How could I share what I had learned without sounding like I had lost my mind? How could I live with the knowledge that life, in its truest form, was so much more than what we see? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't need to have all the answers. I didn't need to explain everything I had experienced. What mattered was that I was living in a way that reflected what I had learned. What mattered was that I was choosing to be present, to be open, and to embrace life in a way I never had before. I started volunteering at a local community center, helping people who were struggling with loss, with illness, with fear of death. It wasn't something I had ever considered before, but it felt like the right thing to do. I didn't have a grand plan, but I felt compelled to offer whatever support I could, even if it was just being there, listening, sharing my story when it seemed right. At first, I felt awkward, like an imposter. Who was I to give advice? Who was I to tell people that death wasn't something to fear, that it was only a part of a larger journey? But as I spoke to others, as I listened to their own stories of loss and survival, I realized that my experience, my near-death experience, wasn't something to hide. It was a gift. A message. And it was meant to be shared. One evening, after a particularly emotional session with a woman named Linda who had just lost her husband, I found myself reflecting on the conversation we had. Linda had been devastated, consumed by grief, and unable to find peace. As she shared her pain, I couldn't help but recall the overwhelming sense of love and peace I had felt when I crossed over to the other side. Linda, I had said to her that night, gently placing a hand on her shoulder, I know this doesn't take away the pain. But I want you to know that your husband is still with you. He's not gone. His love, his essence, it's still here. I know it's hard to believe, but I've seen it. I've felt it. She had looked at me with tears in her eyes, not sure what to make of my words. But there had been a moment, just a fleeting moment, when I saw a glimmer of something in her eyes. It wasn't hope, not yet. But it was something else. A flicker of peace. Of recognition. That night, I lay in bed thinking about how my experience was starting to shape the way I lived. It wasn't about grand gestures or profound speeches. It was about small acts of kindness, about sharing love and connection where it was needed most. And it was about honoring the life I had been given, not with fear, but with gratitude. The next day, as I walked through the community center to meet with another group, I was approached by a man named Frank. He had been one of the first people I had spoken to when I began volunteering, a man in his mid-60s who had lost his wife to cancer several years ago. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, his voice gruff but kind. "Of course," I said, motioning toward a quiet corner of the building. We sat down together, and Frank didn't waste any time getting to the point. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," he began. "About how you felt when you died. And I gotta be honest, I didn't know what to make of it at first. I don't know if I believe in all that afterlife stuff. But, I've been thinking, you know. I think I want to believe. I think I want to feel what you felt." My heart swelled, but I stayed quiet, letting him continue. "Do you really think they're still here? Our loved ones? That they're not just gone?" I looked into Frank's eyes, seeing the hope and the doubt intertwined. "I do. I know it. I've felt it, Frank. They're not gone. They're still here. We're all connected. And that connection doesn't end with death. It's just another part of the journey." Frank nodded slowly, as though processing what I had said. "I want to believe that," he whispered, almost to himself. And in that moment, I realized that this was why I had come back. Not just for myself, but to help others see the light I had glimpsed. To give them the hope and comfort I had found. And maybe, just maybe, that was the purpose I had been given. To spread the message of love, connection, and the truth that death wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And that was all I needed to know. Despite the sense of purpose that had settled over me, there were moments when the doubts would creep in. The world around me was a stark contrast to the peace I had felt during my time beyond the veil. People didn't understand. They couldn't understand. How could they? How could anyone truly grasp what I had experienced unless they had lived through it themselves? At first, it didn't bother me. I had a mission now, and that was all that mattered. But as the weeks passed, I began to feel the weight of my own isolation. Even Emily, who had been so supportive, didn't fully comprehend what I was going through. She could see the change in me, and she loved me for it, but there was still a gap between us, an invisible wall, built from the fact that I had seen something she hadn't. There were days when I would wake up feeling as though I had never left that place. The memories of the light, the voices, the sense of love and belonging would flood my mind like a rush of water, drowning out everything else. But then, the moment would fade, and the reality of my life, of my world, would come crashing back. I'd look around at the people I interacted with, and I'd wonder, do they feel this too? Do they know what I know? But of course, they didn't. And that's what made it hard. I wasn't living in the same world anymore. I had been to the other side, and now, I couldn't unsee it. Every conversation, every task, every social interaction felt shallow and hollow compared to the deep truth I had felt. I wanted to shout from the rooftops, to tell everyone, there's more to this life than you know. You're not just here to go through the motions. There's love, there's connection, and there's peace waiting for you on the other side. Please, just believe me. But I didn't. I couldn't. I couldn't force people to believe something they hadn't experienced for themselves. I couldn't make them feel what I had felt, see what I had seen. And I hated that. One night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the photos on the wall, snapshots of my life, moments frozen in time. A family vacation from years ago. A wedding photo of Emily and me, smiling with youthful optimism. A picture of me holding my newborn daughter, my hands trembling with the wonder of new life. I felt disconnected from those images. Those moments seemed so far away, as if they had happened to someone else, someone who no longer existed. The man in those photos had been consumed by the day-to-day grind, the pursuit of success, the distractions that kept him from seeing the bigger picture. That man had never known what I knew now. He hadn't touched the divine, hadn't glimpsed the truth of what happens after death. A knock on the door broke my reverie. I glanced up, startled, before Emily poked her head into the room. "You okay?" she asked softly, her voice filled with concern. "You've been kind of distant lately." I sighed, rubbing my face. "I don't know, Em. I'm trying to make sense of all of this. But some days, it's harder than others." She walked over to the bed, sitting down beside me. "I know it's been a lot. You're changing, and that's not easy. But I see it. I see the way you're more patient, more present. And I'm proud of you. I want to be, Emily. I really do. But sometimes I feel so alone in this. Like I'm the only one who's seen it, and no one else understands. It's like I'm living in two worlds at once." Her eyes softened with understanding. "I can't know exactly what you've been through, but I'm here. And I'll be here as you try to figure it all out. But don't carry this burden by yourself. You don't have to." I looked at her, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I know. I just wish I could share it more with you. With anyone. But it's hard, Em. I see things differently now. And I feel like the more I try to talk about it, the more I sound like I'm crazy. People think I'm just going through something. I don't know how to make them see what I've seen." She reached for my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "You don't need to make anyone see what you've seen. All you have to do is live it. Let your actions speak for you. You've got so much love and light inside you. Let it shine, and the right people will notice." Her words helped, but they didn't completely ease the weight I was carrying. There were still times when I felt like a stranger in my own life. A part of me wanted to share the depths of my experience with those around me, to help them see beyond their own limited perceptions of life and death. But I couldn't. Not yet, anyway. And that felt like a burden I wasn't sure how to carry. The following week saw me slipping in and out of these cycles of doubt and clarity. I would wake up feeling like a different person, filled with purpose, and by the end of the day, I'd question whether I was fooling myself. Was I truly living a more meaningful life? Or was I just trying to convince myself that the truth I had seen was real? One evening, as I sat in my car parked outside the community center, I ran my hands over the steering wheel, my thoughts swirling. It was a quiet night, no one around, the world seemingly frozen in time. And then it hit me, the same feeling I had had in the moments before I left my body on that operating table. The pressure, the pull, the gentle sense of something greater. I opened the door of the car and stood, letting the cool night air fill my lungs. I closed my eyes, trying to quiet my mind. And just like that, I felt it. The familiar warmth, the sense of peace that had followed me ever since my near-death experience. The words came, soft and clear, though they weren't spoken aloud. You are not alone. I stood there for what felt like hours, letting the truth of those words wash over me. The doubts, the confusion, the isolation, they all faded. The pull to serve, to share the love I had felt, was stronger than ever. It wasn't about convincing anyone. It wasn't about making people see. It was about living my truth. Living in a way that honored the experience I had been given. I didn't need to make everyone understand. I just needed to be. And in that moment, I finally understood. The weeks following that night of revelation brought a sense of stillness I hadn't expected. It was as though the universe had taken a breath, and I was holding it, suspended in time. The chaos and noise of the world around me had dulled, and for the first time since I'd come back from the other side, I felt truly at peace. But it was not an easy peace. It was a peace that came with quiet moments of reflection, of understanding, and, at times, of confusion. It was the kind of peace that required you to stop, really look, and listen. It was the kind of peace that made you feel more connected, but it also made you painfully aware of how disconnected the world was in general. It wasn't long before I noticed the subtle changes in my interactions with others. I wasn't trying to force anything. I wasn't trying to preach or convince anyone of the afterlife, of what I'd seen. I simply started to be more present with people. More aware of the little moments. The way a smile could convey a universe of emotion, or how a stranger's eyes could hold a depth of story if you were willing to look long enough. One afternoon, I found myself sitting at a cafe, a place I often went to clear my head. The weather was unseasonably warm for early fall, and the golden light filtered through the trees outside, casting long shadows across the pavement. I sat alone at a corner table, watching the world pass by, when an elderly man shuffled in, his cane tapping the ground with every step. He looked tired, worn down by the weight of time. He ordered a coffee in a slow, deliberate manner, then hesitated as he looked around for a place to sit. The cafe wasn't crowded, but he seemed to be searching for something, a connection, perhaps, or a familiar face. His eyes briefly met mine, and for a moment, we locked gazes. There was something about him, something that felt familiar. I didn't know why, but I gestured for him to come over. Hey, if you're looking for a seat, I've got one here. Plenty of space. The man smiled gratefully, moving over to my table. As he sat down, he let out a soft sigh, as though the weight of his years had finally caught up with him. I don't mean to intrude, he said with a voice that cracked slightly, but sometimes, you just get to a point in life where you don't want to be alone anymore. I smiled, though there was a twinge of sadness in his words. I get that. Sometimes, it's hard to face the world alone. But it's also hard to really be with people, you know. Everyone's so wrapped up in their own things. He nodded slowly, his wrinkled hands wrapped around his coffee cup. The thing is, I've lived a long time, and I've seen so much. But I never really understood what it was all for. You know. I've always wondered if there was something more to this life than the day-to-day grind. You get to a point where you start questioning everything, don't you? His words hit me like a jolt. They weren't just the musings of an old man, they were the musings of someone who had reached the point of awakening, just as I had. He was asking the same questions I had been asking not so long ago. What was all of this for? I think a lot of people wonder that, I replied softly. I've been thinking a lot about it myself lately. And the more I think about it, the more I'm convinced that life isn't just about surviving. It's about being connected. It's about love. There's something deeper than just getting through the day. The man studied me for a moment, his eyes narrowing in thought. I don't know if I believe in all that spiritual stuff, he said, but I do think there's something to it. I think there has to be more. Otherwise, what's the point of all this pain and suffering? His words resonated deeply with me. It was the same question that had haunted me after my near-death experience: why does suffering exist? And yet, somehow, the answer I had come to realize was that suffering was not pointless. It was part of the journey, part of the awakening. Without the struggles, without the darkness, we would never be able to appreciate the light. I think the pain is part of it, I said, carefully choosing my words. It's part of what makes us who we are. And maybe it's through the pain that we start to really see what's important. We start to appreciate the small moments, the connections we make with each other. Those things are the real treasures. The man nodded slowly, taking a long sip from his coffee. I used to think that happiness was about getting everything right, being successful, being comfortable. But now, I think it's more about being present. Just being in the moment and connecting with the people around you. That's the real treasure. For a long moment, we sat there in silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. And in that silence, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. It wasn't a sudden revelation or a burst of insight. It was simply the recognition that, in that moment, we were both experiencing something profound together. A shared understanding. A quiet connection that transcended words. Thank you, he said, breaking the silence. You've given me something to think about. Maybe it's not too late to start living differently. I smiled at him, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for this unexpected encounter. It's never too late, I replied gently. As long as you're breathing, you have the chance to change. To find meaning. We talked for another hour, exchanging stories and ideas. And when he finally stood to leave, he gave me a nod, his eyes twinkling with a kind of quiet wisdom. I'll remember what you said, he told me, and I think I'll start paying more attention to the moments. To the connections. I watched him leave, feeling that strange sense of fulfillment wash over me. I had never seen that man before in my life, and yet, in our brief conversation, we had shared something profound. A glimpse of the truth that connected us all. And in that moment, I realized something important: I was no longer alone in my experience. I wasn't the only one who had questioned the purpose of life, or wondered about the meaning of our existence. There were others out there, people who had, perhaps, not experienced death in the same way I had, but who were asking the same questions. People who were searching for answers, looking for connection, for truth. And that, in itself, was a gift. A reminder that no matter how isolated I felt at times, there was always someone else out there feeling the same way. Always someone who was ready to listen, ready to open up, ready to find meaning. It wasn't about convincing anyone of what I knew. It was about living the truth that I had found, and trusting that those who were meant to see it would find their way to it, in their own time. In that quiet cafe, amidst the noise of the world, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I wasn't alone. And neither was anyone else. That was the truth I had discovered. And it was the truth I would carry with me, wherever I went. The more I allowed myself to let go of the need to explain, to be understood, the more I found that I was healing. It wasn't an instant fix. It wasn't as though one conversation or one moment of clarity would solve everything. But there was something undeniably powerful about accepting the truth of what I had experienced and letting it wash over me like a gentle tide. I had spent so much of my life searching for meaning, for answers, for validation. And I had always believed that the more I knew, the better I would be. But now, it was different. I no longer needed to chase after the answers or try to make sense of every detail. The truth wasn't something that could be explained with words or even understood with the mind. It was something that had to be felt, deep in the bones. And I felt it. I felt it every day. But even as the sense of peace grew, there was still an undercurrent of sadness that I couldn't fully shake. It wasn't sadness in the way most people might think of it. It wasn't a grief for what I had lost or for the life I had once lived. It was a sadness for the lives that were still stuck in the cycles I had once been trapped in, the endless rush, the superficial interactions, the disconnection. I could see it everywhere now, like a haze that clouded the vision of those around me. And that was when I realized something crucial: I wasn't just living for myself anymore. I was living for everyone else too. I knew that I had to help people see the truth, not by telling them what I had seen, but by showing them how to live differently. I had seen the light, the boundless love that awaited us all beyond the veil. But I also understood that the real challenge wasn't in death, it was in life. It was in how we chose to live while we were still here. In the weeks after my conversation with the elderly man at the cafe, I began to feel an inner urge to reach out to people, not to preach, but to listen. I started attending support groups and counseling sessions, where I could connect with others who were grieving or struggling in ways that felt familiar to me. I wanted to give people space to talk about their fears, their doubts, their experiences without judgment, without the need for answers. One particular session stands out in my mind. It was a grief group, for people who had lost loved ones. As I sat in the circle, listening to each person share their pain, I felt a deep well of empathy open up inside me. Every story was different, but the underlying thread was the same: a search for meaning, a desire to understand, a longing for connection. When it was my turn to speak, I hesitated. I wasn't sure how much I should reveal. Would they think I was crazy? Would they believe me if I told them what I had seen on the other side? But then I realized, this wasn't about them understanding me. This was about connecting with them in their pain, offering a space for them to be seen and heard. And if they found comfort in my experience, so be it. If not, that was okay too. I'm not here to tell you I have all the answers, I began, my voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. But I can tell you that there is more to this life than we can see. I've been on the other side, and I know that there is love, there is peace, and there is something waiting for us when we're ready. I can't explain it fully. But I know it's real. The room fell silent, and for a moment, I thought I might have made a mistake. But then, one by one, people began to speak up. I've always wondered if my husband is still with me, one woman said, her voice breaking. I've felt him. I've felt his presence sometimes, like he's right beside me. Do you think that's possible? Another man, who had lost his daughter years ago, nodded. I've had dreams of her. Dreams where she's happy, and it feels so real. I always wondered if it was just my mind trying to comfort me. I looked around the room, seeing the hope flicker in their eyes, and I knew, in that moment, that I was exactly where I needed to be. This wasn't about me forcing people to believe in something they didn't understand. It was about sharing the love, the peace, the connection that I had discovered. It was about giving them permission to feel what they had felt, to trust in the unseen, to believe that their loved ones hadn't truly left them. As the session ended, one woman, her eyes red from crying, came up to me. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. "You've given me something to hold on to. I've been so lost, so angry, and I didn't know how to keep going. But hearing you, it's like a light went on. I think maybe I can start to heal now." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I hugged her, feeling that same warmth, that same love, envelop me. This was what it was all about, this was the healing. It wasn't about finding definitive answers or explanations. It was about allowing ourselves to feel connected, to see the beauty in the simple moments, to embrace the possibility that love transcends everything, even death. I had come back to this world with a mission, not to convince everyone of the afterlife, but to show them the beauty of the present. To help people understand that the love they sought wasn't just a distant memory or a fleeting moment, it was alive, it was here, and it was within them. And in that space, healing could begin. I started to feel the cracks in my own heart begin to heal, slowly, as I witnessed the healing in others. It was a cycle, something so much bigger than me. A ripple that extended beyond my small corner of the world, touching lives in ways I couldn't have predicted. I wasn't just helping others to heal. I was healing too. And in those quiet moments of connection, I found that the answers I had been seeking were always right there in front of me. Life wasn't about the chase. It was about being. Being present. Being kind. Being open to the love and light that was all around us, whether we could see it or not. That was the gift I had received when I crossed over. And it was the gift I was meant to share. I wasn't afraid of death anymore, because I knew that death was just another step in the journey. And as long as I was alive, I would keep sharing the light, the love, and the truth that had been revealed to me. It was the greatest gift I could give. And it was the greatest gift I could receive in return. It had been months since I had first walked out of that operating room, forever changed. I had seen things, felt things, experienced a kind of peace that most people could only dream of. I had come back with a mission, a purpose that I could no longer ignore. But there was something I hadn't fully faced until now. A lingering question that had followed me all this time: what happens when the peace fades? What happens when you're not actively seeking connection, when you've shared your story, and when the world you return to starts feeling distant once again? I didn't have answers. I had lived in the question for so long, and I had learned to accept that not everything needed to be answered. But I had never fully let go of the fear. The fear that, one day, I might forget the peace I had once felt. The fear that death, with all its unknowns, might take away the connection I had found on the other side. The fear that, in time, I might slip back into the same patterns I had lived with before. That's when I understood something important. Fear is never fully gone. It's not something we can simply erase from our lives. It's part of being human. It's part of what makes us so fragile and yet so powerful at the same time. The key isn't in trying to banish fear, it's in learning how to live with it, how to move forward in spite of it. One afternoon, as I sat alone in the quiet of my home, I thought back on the days when I had been obsessed with finding the meaning of life, when I had been so consumed with proving to myself and others that the afterlife was real. Back then, I was clinging to the certainty of what I had seen, as if that would somehow guarantee me peace. But peace didn't come from certainty. It didn't come from needing to prove anything. Peace came from accepting uncertainty. From letting go of the need to control every moment, to know every answer, to explain every mystery. Peace came from trusting that we are all part of something much larger, something we will never fully understand, and that's okay. Maybe the beauty of life is found not in the certainty of what happens next, but in the embrace of the unknown. It was then that I realized that I had already found the most important lesson of all: life, in all its fleeting, unpredictable beauty, was enough. The love we experience, the connections we make, the moments of quiet reflection, these were the things that gave life meaning. Not the fear of death. Not the need for certainty. As I reflected on my journey, I knew that I would never stop feeling the weight of my near-death experience. It had forever altered me, had given me the ability to see the world in ways I never had before. But I also knew that it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The story didn't stop when I came back from the other side. It wasn't about finding closure or reaching an end point. It was about learning to live fully, to embrace every day as a gift. And that meant being present, not just for the moments of joy, but for the moments of pain, confusion, and doubt too. They were all part of the tapestry, all part of the human experience. I thought about the people I had met along the way, those who had been searching for answers, those who had been struggling with their own fears, their own grief. I thought about how, in my brief interactions with them, I had been able to offer a small light. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was the truth that had been revealed to me, and it was a truth I could pass on, not through words, but through the way I lived. As the sun began to set outside, casting a soft golden light across the room, I felt a calm wash over me. The world outside continued on, just as it always had. People moved through their lives, rushing from one task to the next, unaware of the deeper truths that lay just beneath the surface. But I wasn't unaware anymore. And that was enough. I stood, walked over to the window, and looked out at the horizon. The sky was painted with hues of orange, pink, and purple, a beautiful reminder that every day brings new opportunities for connection, for growth, for love. I had died. And yet, I had never truly been more alive. In that moment, I knew that life would continue to challenge me, to push me, to test me. But I was no longer afraid. Death was no longer something to fear. It was simply a part of the journey, a journey I was no longer afraid to embrace. I had learned to let go. I had learned to live. And now, I would continue to walk this path, one step at a time, trusting that with each moment, I was becoming the person I was always meant to be. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And in that beginning, I was ready to live. Fully, fearlessly, and with all the love in my heart. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?